Okay. I've realised that as I stand on this stage, I'm in trouble. First of all, I'm after the coffee break, which is always difficult. Secondly, when I arrived in Korea, I explained that my presentation is only 20 minutes long, and I've been told that I've got a 40-minute slot. So I hope you got a lot of questions. The final bit of trouble is that Tom has covered about 60% of what I was going to say. And also, I'm following the Western guy who spoke colloquial Korean. So I've decided I'm going to do my speech in French, and it's going to be one slide, okay? So anyway, thank you. My name's Mark Payton. I'm here to explain an initiative that aims to get audiences to make more informed news choices. Now, over the next, where's the slide thing here? Is that it? That one, pardon me. Sorry. So over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what the project is, its origins, its people, its funding and its aims. I'm going to talk a little bit about the audience research that informed the project's direction. I'm going to describe the trust indicators themselves, what they are, and how news organisations use them. I'm going to talk about what we've learned over the last 2 years, and what news organisations are taking part today, and what the immediate future looks like for the project. Whoops. Let's try that. So let's start at the beginning. What is the Trust Project? Well, it began back in 2014 in the States, and there was a round table of journalists and academics. At that round table, they were voicing concerns that the battle for clicks in online newsrooms was eroding quality of journalism, that it was undermining honesty and quality. Leading that round table at the time was a lady called Sally Lerman, a journalist. Now, after the round table, she contacted contacts at Twitter and Google and asked them a simple question. Can your algorithm support ethical journalism? Can it be made to actually do good? And the answer from both platforms came back, well, kind of, yes. Now, that answer led to research into what we now term as signals, okay? And those signals are what the audience are looking for when deciding if they trust content or not. It also led to the creation of a cross-industry working group that had about 80 senior editors and institutions involved. And those groups were purely looking to define those indicators so that the signals could be seen by those platforms. So you've heard a little bit today about the subject of transparency. Excuse me 1 second. Hold on. Yeah, you've heard a little bit today about the subject of transparency. So since that's primarily what the Trust Project is about, we should talk a little bit about its funding. The project's funded by Craig Newmark Philanthropies. Newmark is the guy who launched Craigslist, one of the world's most famous classifieds. It's funded by Google, the Democracy Fund, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, and the Markula Foundation. Its mission, let's see if I can do this straight, is to amplify journalism's commitment to transparency, accuracy, inclusion and fairness so that the public can make informed news choices. Now, how does that actually play out? Well, you can appreciate that that mission is, well, it's not so easy to say, actually. It's fairly straightforward, but it's incredibly ambitious and challenging. In fact, we've just spent the last 3 hours talking about exactly that. But the principles behind how the Trust Project operates are actually fairly straightforward. Readers are looking for signals that tell them whether they can trust the story. Effectively, they're fishing for truth if you will. We can turn those machine-readable signals that search and social platforms go looking for, and they can use them. News organisations can show those signals on their sites, and so that, in theory, provides readers with the transparency they want and the platforms with the right signs that that site can be trusted. Now, the end result should deliver on the Trust Project's mission to help the public make better news choices. But for the public to make those choices, it was critical to understand the public's decision-making process when consuming news. Now, I've been a journalist for 34 years. I figured out after a period of time I was paid to know the answer. And a lot of journalists in this room, we are paid to be right. What I found fascinating about the Trust Project is I ran a digital development team for 11 years of my life. At no point, I'm ashamed to say, in that 11 years, did we actually sit down with an audience in detail and say, what do you trust? Tell me specifically what in that page makes you trust something. And we found at the time for the Trust Project, there was no existing detailed body of research that purely looked into how users appraise stories. So we commissioned 2 pieces of research, one in the US, one in Europe, back in 2015. And we asked a diverse group of news consumers exactly those questions. We asked about their perceptions of news. We asked about the use of it. And we asked how they decided, how they trusted something. Now, as you're about to see, the research revealed very distinct groups of news consumers. But for all their differences, those interviews also highlighted common attitudes and concerns. And there's the 4 groups. Group number 1, we called avid. These people are just news addicts. They spend their entire day, you'd be amazed how many of them there are, just consuming news. They also, by happenstance, are extremely opinionated people, and a lot of that they're getting from the news. The next group we called engaged. These are news explorers. They're always keen to know more. The opportunistic group use news primarily for function. It's simply to keep appraised as to what's going on. And the last group you might recognise, the angry and disengaged. These people see news as a system that they're not part of. It's something else, it's a different world, and it certainly doesn't reflect how they feel about things. So, let's talk about the similarities between them. Even though those four groups are quite different, there were distinct similarities in the comments they made during the research process. They all value news, but often in the way it was presented, it was raising more questions than it actually answered for them. And they were walking away, all 4 groups, rather frustrated. Now, typically, the questions they voiced during the research were, well, number 1, the agenda. What's this site's angle? What's its politics? What does it believe? What are its editorial policies? Are there any alternate perspectives on exactly this same story? Who was the journalist? What was his or her license to talk about the subject? It's okay you just writing it and having a byline, but do you actually know anything about this subject? Is the story straight news, analysis, or opinion? Back to the comments you heard before the coffee break about the labelling of content. What proof was there that the story was fully researched? Was the content locally sourced? And actually, is there just a way I can participate in the story? I've read this thing, I actually have a view on it, can I contribute? So after that first round of research, we actually had a completely different understanding of the problem. Regardless of the news consumer type, there were common things that they were looking for in the news that just weren't there. So, the Trust Project came up with a concept of indicators. These indicators would be things that we would put into the news that were effectively the answer to the question that they were not getting answered at the time. So the question is, what are these indicators and how can you use them? Now, a slide or 2 back, I highlighted the common questions that research groups said they have of the news. The indicators answer those questions, and there are 8 of them in total. There's policies and practices, author-reporter expertise, labels, methods, citations and references, local, diverse voices, and public engagement. Now, you'll be relieved to hear that time doesn't allow me to talk you through all of those in detail, but I will do a few of them as a brief overview, just to give you an idea of what they do and what they're about. So first off, we have policies and practices. This indicator tells the audience about your standards, who funds you, what your mission is. It's all about transparency and disclosure. And in fact, it's all the things you'd expect to find in a fair, accountable journalistic operation. And here's a couple of live examples, one from La Repubblica in Italy, and another one from Mike in the US. And the indicator is really straightforward. There's nothing that clever about it. It's an honest description of your editorial policies laid bare for your audience. Now let's talk about the author and reporter expertise. Now this goes much further than the attempts that we've all seen in search results to present a simple author portrait and name. Okay? This standard demands that you provide in-depth details about the journalist, including their areas of expertise and the other stories they've worked on. Now, there was a question earlier on about the issue of bylines and those places where you can't necessarily name who you are. That is covered off within the Trust Project guidelines. All it asks is that you include in your best practices why you don't include a byline in a given area. And here's a couple of examples, again from Mike and the soccer news website, 442.com. Now, on a personal level, my journey with the Trust Project, as somebody who's supported it and is now part of it, is that time and again, I was astonished that the simple things that an audience was looking for was not commonly available on really popular sites out there. And for me, the issue of an author's byline and their expertise and knowledge really is part of the whole package. If I'm a news consumer, I want to know about who you are and what your angle is and your expertise in a particular area. So to find out that it wasn't more prevalent was a bit of a shock. Next, we have type of work. I'll tell you what, I'll just replace that with the word label. It's simply a matter of differentiating the story from news, opinion, and satire. Oh, it also shows, as Anton said earlier on, the difference if content is sponsored or promoted. So if it has a commercial association, you have to label it. Now, as with the author profile, again, I was rather astonished that this wasn't more prevalent before the Trust Project began its work. Even more so because, as I said, I ran a digital development team for 11 years of my life. It's the simplest thing to add. This is not massively complex. And here's an example from a US news site showing the use of the analysis label in type of work. Now, as you can see, the Trust Project's guidelines, we actually stipulate that the label should offer a brief description of its meaning. You can see it on the rollover there on the right. Now let's come to citations and references. This was actually one of the most challenging of the indicators to specify, and I suppose for reasons I now understand. But it actually comes down to a very simple proposition. It's showing your hard work. Citations and references aims to bolster the evidence of genuine research claims and lets the audience dig a little bit deeper. It's there to give access to the stories behind the facts and the assertion. Now, as these examples show, again from Mike and also from The Economist, it's about making a merit of your hard investigative work by sharing it with your users. So, those are a few of the indicators. I won't take you through any more. All of the documents are available, and I believe the presentation will be available after this event, and I've included links to all of the indicators so you can read up about them. Now, I mentioned at the start of the session that the project began by asking two of the major platforms whether their systems could be used to aid journalism. The Trust Project has maintained and actually grown relationships with both the platforms and the news distributors committed to using indicators to surface more trusted content. So we're pretty close to Google, Bing, Facebook, Twitter, NewsGuard, that crowd. And in fact, Google says that the type of work label is valuable in determining whether a story is standard news, opinion, analysis, or an explainer, while Facebook says it will continue working with the project to explore different ways of displaying the indicators to give people a better understanding of the news they see on Facebook. So, next I want to talk a little bit about what the project's learned since it began, and a little bit about the impact the indicators have on the news sites that use them. The project's aim, as I said, is to help users make informed choices. But I suppose the question for a lot of the people in this room is what's the actual benefit to a newsroom? Well, for a news website, it says that it can be trusted, that it's reputable, reliable, and that it tells the whole story. If you're a reporter, it says that you're carefully researched and well qualified to talk about a subject. Well, at least that's the theory. To put that test to the theory, put that theory to the test, and before the Trust Project rolled out properly, we realized that we were asking some of the world's best-known news organizations to implement this without much proof on our part. So we asked for the Center for Media Engagement at the University of Texas to do some research. That research conducted before and after tests on 1,000 US news consumers. The differences in declared levels of trust with and without the indicators was statistically fairly significant. Now, I know from experience how much time, effort, and money goes into increasing engagement metrics on news websites. The commercial benefits of incremental percentage increases can be huge. So we were delighted to see these kind of increases as a result of including the indicators. And you can see in this example the increase in perception of it being a carefully researched article. And the author was well qualified to write it in the first place, also saw quite a sizable leap. Now also, interestingly, in today's, we'll call it challenging, commercial environment for media, the research also showed a higher interest in paying, with a third of the research group saying they were either somewhat more willing or much more willing to pay than they were without participation in the indicators. In fact, by the end of it, the entire research seemed to vindicate the project's original supposition that if you give them transparency the readers are looking for but often not getting, the result is that their trust in the content would increase and your engagement numbers go up. Now, that research was designed to test assumptions before we put the project out live. And as such, it was conducted using real consumers, real stories and indicators, but on a test website. So as you can imagine, we were somewhat curious to see if the results would be replicated in the wild. Encouragingly, it seems as though the indicators work just as well once let loose on a major news website. The Mirror is one of the UK's most popular news outlets, and it found similar increases to the audience trust from those that we got from the University of Texas research. It saw a 9-point increase in agreement with the statement that the Mirror has trustworthy journalists, and a 10-point increase in agreement that the Mirror is honest about the sources behind its stories. Again, I've included links in the presentation at the end of this, so you'll be able to read up on the research itself. So, I've talked about the project's aims, its methods, and the impact it can have on a live news website. Now let's focus a little bit on which news organisations are taking part and what happens next. But first, let me have a glass of water. Hold on one sec. So the first wave of news websites to include the indicators, including some fairly big names. You can see the BBC on there, The Economist, The Mirror and La Repubblica in Italy. On the left-hand side there, you've got the sites that launched in November 2017, either with the full indicators showing on the site or built into the data in the structure of the site. On the right-hand side, you've got the websites that are currently implementing the indicators for a phase 2 launch. Now that means that we've hit about 130 million users a month seeing the indicators. That's on 121 news sites across Europe, Canada, and the USA. And we'll soon be, with phase 2, at 200 sites with the arrival of those phase 2 partners. And there's a quick overview of some of the phase 2 partners involved. You've got Zeit Online, Sky News. It's quite an impressive crowd. We're also rather delighted, actually, that finally we've managed to launch a WordPress plugin. And this is big news for the initiative. The plugin adds the fields required to show the indicators on one of the world's leading content management systems. It's one that's especially popular with media publishers throughout the world. And we know the battle for development resource in news organizations can be pretty fierce. And the release of this plugin lowers the technical barriers, so making the case for including the indicators that much easier. And so the WordPress sites will be able to adopt the full set of trust indicators in no time. We're also delighted to be part of, I suppose, a broader community. Tom mentioned earlier on the number of organisations at the moment, including the Trust Project, that are getting involved in supporting the business of trust in journalism. And all of these organisations you see here in the US are involved in one degree or another in that cause, and they're all committed to using or building on the trust indicators in future. So that's kind of the journey of the last 2 years. I suppose, what does the Trust Project have now? What does it offer the world? Well, it offers shared definitions for user-facing indicators. It offers a shared technical vocabulary. I don't know how many people in this room are technical or involved in the plumbing of the internet, but there's a body called schema.org. And I suppose, but rather unkindly for schema, it kind of defines what things are. To my astonishment, when I began my involvement in the project, there was simply a concept called an author. There was nothing else. It didn't say where the author was, what his or her expertise was. Schema.org also simply knew there was a thing called news. It didn't understand the concept of satire. It didn't understand analysis. It didn't understand opinion. There was just a thing called news. So I think if nothing else, the Trust Project has contributed quite a major thing to the internet in that now Schema.org knows what analysis looks like because we've written it in there. And with a little bit of Google's help because we kind of hurried that process along. So it's quite a big thing. We also offer a simple, straightforward system. There's lots of things out there that are so complex that you don't even really know where to start. The Trust Project, I've talked you through 4 of those indicators. There are only 8 of them. We're not talking about Amazon's entire back catalogue here. It's quite straightforward. It has the ability to scale as well. Anybody can pretty much adopt and start doing this. And finally, it's kind of a foundation for further work. We're currently looking at revisiting the audience research that we did back in 2015 with the aim of asking those audiences and others around the world the same question. Have you moved on, in your opinion, of what trusted content looks like? And with that, I'll be quiet. Are there any questions?
네, 뜻깊은 강연 해주셔서 감사합니다. 이어서 질의응답 시간을 가지도록 하겠습니다. 첫 번째 질문 보도록 하겠습니다.
This isn't on, so I'm going to struggle to understand this.
발표하신 내용을 보면 신뢰 지표가 다양하고 많습니다. 흔히 관련된 다른 글로벌 프로젝트들, 예를 들어 영국 옥스퍼드 대학교 로이터 연구소의 디지털 뉴스 리포트는 어느 정도 신뢰하느냐의 단일 질문으로 뉴스 미디어의 신뢰도를 측정하고 있습니다. 이러한 단일 질문의 한계는 무엇이라고 생각하십니까? 왜 다양한 신뢰 지표들을 개발하고 측정해야 하는지요? 그리고 제시하신 다양한 신뢰 지표 중 제일 중요하다고 판단되는 것은 무엇인지요?
Okay. I don't think there's a most important indicator. I think we will know the answer to that. So I'll start at the beginning. The interesting thing for me about being involved and supporting the project is that it's taking the audience first. What we're trying to do is delve into, in actually quite an academic way, attitudes to trust in a way that the question hasn't necessarily been asked before. So we will have a better view of the answer to that question once we have all the data back from the phase 1 launch, and also once the second round of partners have launched as well. We're kind of working as quite an open community, all sharing data with each other. Why are there so many indicators? Because that's what the research told us the audience wanted the answers to. You've simply got the list of their most important questions, and our job is to answer them because we're journalists.
네, 다음 질문 보도록 하겠습니다. What are the direct incentives or rewards for participating in such a significant project aside from improved credibility?
Yes, okay. As I said during my speech, I spent 11 years of my life running a portfolio of 20 million uniques a month across 73 websites. And I had teams spending lots of money trying to increase engagement once they actually got through to our site and product. I had an entire optimization department doing that very thing. I've seen results from the first implementation of the trust indicators that are quite remarkable. Actually, those figures are pretty impressive. So if your own commercial teams are concerned about time on site and engagement once they actually reach your product, then that surely is justification enough for including the trust indicators. The next point is, in that portfolio I ran, we spent a lot more money on other things than we did including the what were effectively 8 fields in a CMS. Okay? It's not that expensive to do. In fact, I think I'll openly share with you, for an entire portfolio of 12 sites, I think it was about £12,000 or something. And even that I didn't believe is a number.